questions started to be asked about what was behind Guinness's meteoric stock price rise. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. At the end of my episode about Bottle 43, Bell's Extra Special, I noted that the brand was purchased by Guinness in a hostile takeover in 1985, and that was the beginning of a story that would end with several people in jail. But I held off on telling that part of the story, which is why I was so thrilled when Bottle 77 turned out to be an extra tiny bottle of none other than Guinness Extra Stout. Guinness, of course, is better known as a beer brand, and it started that way in 1759 when Arthur Guinness signed the famous 9,000-year lease on a brewery in Dublin, Ireland. But like most of the companies I've talked about, they didn't stay in their lane and just keep making beer. In the 1970s, they purchased 270 other companies, making products as diverse as baby bibs and car polish. This wasn't working out so well for them, so in 1981 they hired Ernest Saunders to right the ship. Saunders was the first non-family member to head up the company, and he got straight to work, getting rid of extraneous, non-profitable companies, reducing the size of the workforce, and bringing in a new management team. His approach worked, profits tripled, and share prices rose fourfold. Saunders' acquisitions were more strategic and targeted, and in 1985 he led Guinness in mounting a hostile takeover bid of Arthur Bell & Sons, whose blended malt whiskey was far and away the UK sales leader, owning 35% of the market. But Bell's was just the first step in their Scotch acquisition strategy. Next up, the big dog itself, Distillers Company Limited, aka DCL. DCL has come up in passing a few times before, including in my episodes about Bottle 31, Bat 69 Scotch, and Bottle 32, Seagram's Almondine. This whiskey behemoth was founded in 1877 and at its peak controlled over 80% of the domestic and 75% of the worldwide Scotch market. But that peak had been in the 1930s, and by the 1970s, Scotch sales in the UK were stagnating. DCL's share of the market had fallen so dramatically that Bell's alone was selling more whiskey in the UK than all of the DCL brands combined. They were ripe for a takeover. In 1985, the first takeover bid came. It was not from Guinness, but from Jimmy Gulliver's Argyle Group, which owned a chain of supermarkets. DCL's leadership was appalled at the idea of being owned by such a lowly company. "Mr. Gulliver deals in potatoes and cans of beans," said one director. "We are not selling brown water in bottles, we are selling Scotch." So they turned to Ernest Saunders and Guinness and invited them to bid. Even though DCL was a shadow of its former self, it was still a huge company, and Gulliver's opening bid was for £1.9 billion, the largest in UK history. Even the newly rejuvenated Guinness would have a hard time beating it. Neither company had the cash on hand, so the offers were mostly in the form of stocks. And as the bidding war intensified through 1985 and into 1986, the Guinness stock price began to rise, and rise, and rise some more. In April of 1986, they clinched the deal, purchasing DCL for £2.6 billion. But soon questions started to be asked about what was behind Guinness's meteoric stock price rise. And the answer is a story that shows up on Biggest Stock Scandals Ever listicles still today. Check the episode description for links with all the dirty details, but the gist of it is that Guinness worked through intermediaries to drive up its own stock price. The practice of encouraging your high finance friends to buy shares in your company to drive up its price was common and not necessarily illegal. But as soon as the company being invested in was the one funneling the money to those investors or promising to indemnify them, well, that was definitely on the "don't do this" side of the law. In the end, Guinness was found to have paid $38 million to 11 companies in at least 6 countries to buy $300 million worth of Guinness stock. This scandal rocked Britain. If you were old enough in the 1980s, you too might be as amused as I was by this quote from the New York Times. "The Guinness affair has been dubbed an alcoholic Dallas, with Ernest Saunders, the recently dismissed chairman, cast as J.R. Ewing." No one shot this J.R., but Ernest Saunders was first fired by the company, then indicted and found guilty along with 3 others. They weren't executives in the company, as I mistakenly said in the Bell's episode, but financiers and traders. One of them, Jack Lyon, would lose his knighthood over the scandal. Saunders himself would be sentenced to 5 years, which was later halved on appeal when an expert witness declared that he was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Perhaps the most amazing thing about this story is that Saunders is the only person to date to make a full recovery from this incurable progressive disease. Okay, so that was a lot from this tiny bottle of Guinness Extra Stout. Can I tell you anything about the bottle itself? Not a lot. There are tons of examples of these online, so it was clearly a novelty item the company produced for some time. Based on the really awesome websites documenting changes to the Guinness label over time, this bottle would appear to be from between 1955 and 1968. I have no idea how I'd even get the tiny cap off, so I don't think I'll try to drink it. Do you have a teeny tiny Guinness novelty bottle? Tell me all about it in the comments here or at my website, mytinybottles.com, or on social media at mytinybottles or at TammyLC on Blue Sky. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow while you're at it. Did you know I have a Patreon? It's a great way to support the project and get some great perks. You'll find a link to that in the episode description. Cheers!